All right, you're back in the office now. For the purpose of this video, I'll assume you're a UX design agency, but the principles apply to any other design agency as well. So if you're in branding, if you're in anything else, the principles will apply there as well. And I will specifically be addressing the needs of a fixed bid proposal, and we're not going to get into retainers and all those other variations in this particular video. We might have to cover that in an entirely different video later on. All right. All the principles that apply to the UX design agencies can be kind of like scaled down to the freelancer level. All right. The first thing we need to do is talk about what are the components that go into a proposal. I had been working on creating proposals for a while, but I actually ran into this proposal that had been created by this massive design agency that does something else altogether. It was something that informed me as to what are the kinds of components that these larger design companies actually cover. Looking at the way in which they have worked on it, it made me kind of like one of the big things that stood out was how professional they looked, how many scenarios they had covered, and all this contingencies that they had for all these various things that they had planned already. It caught my attention because it had covered so many aspects of the process that and things that could go wrong in the process as well. I have to mention that the larger a project gets, all these contingencies and scenarios will actually matter because it's a possibility. And the longer a project spans, these proposals and terminologies, the terms which are contained within these proposals will actually play a key role. All right, that being said, let's get into what a typical proposal covers. Let's actually begin by talking about what a proposal is. A proposal is nothing but the answers to all the questions that a client might have before they hire you. So they're going to be wondering whether you've understood the project well enough when they've explained it to you. Are you and them on the same page? Are their assumptions about the project the same as your assumptions? What are you going to be delivering? In what format? Are you going to be using the same tools that they expect that you will be using, or are you going to be using something better? So these are some of the questions that they typically have. That is what a proposal tries to answer. Right. There are 8 components within the proposal. So all these questions kind of like break down, and these 8 components we're going to cover in more detail going forward. So first and foremost is the project summary. Here we are trying to figure out if everybody is on the same page. So you might have had a lot of conversations with the client before or client's teams before, and you guys might have explored a bunch of different ideas during that time. But it matters what is finally accounted for. So you put it in black and white saying that, we might have spoken about these 3 ideas, but this is the one we're going to cover at the moment. So I also took the opportunity to talk about what is unique about my agency within this particular section. What is my approach to the problem? One of the big things that I differentiated myself with is the fact that I used to be a developer before I turned into a designer. So I use that to my advantage by talking about how my approach can actually result in designs that are actually implementable. So that was a good thing to contrast against other agencies that had founders who were from marketing or from other fields of design or art even. So that is something that I utilize to my advantage over here. The biggest, most important section within this is something called the feature list, right? This is a list of all the features that comprise the project that you're working on. So it is a 34,000 feet overview of the project, not exactly like, line by line what details are to be covered. But so you'll be mentioning things like, you'll have an authentication mechanism, you'll have a browse section, you'll have a search feature, and so on. Right? That's the kind of descriptions you want. You don't want to get down to talking about, does this authentication work with OTP sent from Indian numbers and things like that. That's not the level of detail that you want here. You just want to cover that there is going to be this authentication mechanism. And as I mentioned earlier, there are several of these side discussions that you might have had with the client, but all that gets boiled down, and you'll be making choices, and you'll be specifying exactly what you're going to be working on and what you're not going to be covering as well. There's no denying it. This is one of the most time-consuming portions of a proposal, but if you do it, this is also something that can easily set you apart. Most other agencies will not be doing this, and this is something that will actually set you apart if you do. But this adds heavily to the amount of time it takes to produce a proposal. So be wary of that as well. But I'll mention one more thing, which is that if you've worked on a few proposals, there'll be a lot of patterns that you would have developed, and you're going to be able to copy paste a lot of these features over to other new proposals in the future as well. And that's how you can actually create a template over time. But overall, this feature list went a long way in convincing my client that I had thought about their problem and I had considered it in a holistic way. And that is the basis on which this proposal was created. And it's not just another off-the-shelf proposal that I just tweaked the numbers and sent it out to the client. That's not what was going on over here, right? So that's something that we actually were able to demonstrate as well. But there's one more thing. I've seen very few clients that actually went through this in detail. So while I would suggest that you do this in order to develop a proposal which is very accurate with the amount of time and effort and costs, keep in mind that this is also something that the client is not going to heavily rely on, and it's only going to play a role when things go wrong or things go badly, and you need to have something to refer and say, this is what we had initially planned, so that's what we are going to be delivering, right? It helps you sort out those kind of situations. There was an incident with this one particular client where they wanted to do it a certain way, but that while I would have normally accommodated these small changes, this particular request was actually a massive one. So I didn't actually have the ability to assume that within the exact same cost of the project. So I was actually able to utilize this particular document or this feature list and actually show to the client saying, this is what we had planned for, and what you're asking for gets really far away from this. We're happy to do it, but it's going to cost extra. That's how I kind of handle this. The next component is the scope. So in this section, you'll be talking about all the deliverables that your company is actually capable of doing. I initially thought of customizing it per project, but I eventually came to the place where I thought it is better to actually list all the things that my company is capable of, and then talk about in another section the specific deliverables that we'll actually be delivering. And that way I'd actually be able to showcase our capabilities, and also it offers the client the opportunity to see what else we can actually deliver. And if it is if any of those things were something they needed, that's something that we could also provide. This is something that this is how I use this particular section, but we'll come to this a little later as well. So this is the deliverable section. This is where you'll go in detail with each of the deliverables. So wireframing might be a deliverable, visual design is another, and click-through prototypes. You might even do development. You might even have the chops to be able to produce videos for your clients and so on. So this is what you will actually cover in this particular section. Go into the details of the kinds of tools that you might use, and also the formats in which you will be delivering the actual deliverables. You can also talk about the method in which it will be delivered as well. This is important because very often the client might actually be expecting a certain format. For instance, in this particular instance with this particular client, we were actually going to be delivering using the tool at that time was called Sketch. So we said that we'll be actually delivering using sketch files, but the client was actually expecting things to be delivered in PSD format, Photoshop document format, and which used to be the tools that UX designers used once upon a time, but they hadn't caught up to the new tools at that particular point in time. I know I'm saying Sketch and calling it the new tool, but Sketch was what we used to use prior to switching over to Figma. So anyway, this was clearly called out in the deliverable section, and the client saw that and they said, hey, we were expecting things to be delivered in Photoshop. So we were actually able to have that conversation and set things right. Imagine if we didn't have that conversation and we actually went ahead and did the work and then started sending them sketch files. And they got adamant and they said, no, the Photoshop is the only way we can actually work. We'd have to go back and rework the entire thing in a tool that we don't use any longer. And that would just add so much overhead to the actual project. So these are things I suggest that you cover right away and you actually provided as much detail in this deliverable section as you can. The next section is actually the team structure. This is kind of important to cover because there are going to be some of these clients that you're going to run into who are going to say, why is this so expensive? My cousin's sister's daughter can actually do UX and she can do it for this much less. But most of us professionals will approach it by hiring a team. There's going to be a project manager. There's going to be, icon designers and copywriters and so on and so forth in order to make this particular output as good as it can possibly be, right? So that is something that you're going to have to explain by talking about the team that is going to be involved. I'll just talk about how we used to do it. So you might differ in your company, the way you approach this problem. But on any project, we used to have a team of 4 people. And it would be headed by one senior designer who's going to be interfacing with the client and getting the requirements and giving them updates and so on. That's their specific job. They're also called the SPOC, and we'll come to that. But this person was actually supported by 2 additional designers who would actually do UX and UI work. That wasn't the way we split up the roles within our company. People were able to switch between these roles. But nonetheless, there were 2 other people that would be supporting this. 4th person would be coming in and doing the necessary aspects of the project that doesn't span across the entire project. So this could be an icon designer or somebody who does copywriting. So these people will come in, do their specific jobs at the specific time and leave. So in this particular component, you'd actually be talking about all the roles that the various team members are going to be playing, and you'll also be covering their level of experience. So if they came in with 2 years of experience, of 10 years of experience, and so on, you'd also mention that, and the duration that they're going to be involved with in the project, whether they're going to be spanning the entire project or are they going to be coming in on an as needed basis. These are all things that you will actually cover in this particular section. This is goes a long way in justifying the price, so please do include this section as well. Okay, now comes the next section, which is the engagement guidelines. This is one of the more important sections that I feel need to be covered in a proposal. This is actually going to lay out exactly what your expectations are of their team and their expectations of you should be. And the project is going to span between 8 and 12 weeks or even longer sometimes. Therefore, it's a good idea to set your expectations of the client's time requirements ahead of time. So the typical thing to do is to define who the single points of contact are on your team, as well as the single point of contact on the client's team as well. Now, the client may be used to working with external agencies, in which case they would already have this kind of a protocol and structure set up. But it is also likely that the client is someone that is actually looking at you to tell them what the process is going to be, in which case you need to cover this as well. So the reason you have a SPOC within your team is because you want that one person to be responsible for fielding all the communication coming in from clients, new requests, changes to the scope and such, all of that to be handled by this person. And on the other side, when you need decisions, you want to reach out to this SPOC from the client side, who will go and reach out to all the stakeholders that are going to be responsible for making decisions and bring that decision over to your SPOC. That's what you want to do. What you don't want to be in is a situation where your SPOC is going to reach out to all the stakeholders within the client's company and try to assimilate all those decisions on their behalf. That might be a humongous challenge if you do try to take that on, especially in situations where there are multiple stakeholders and the internal politics is not very clear always. The other thing you want to do is also set up meetings. One is to set a pace for the project by setting up these meetings. So you want to have at least one meeting with the client every week. This is where you're going to discuss updates as well as get their feedback, as well as set an expectation for what is coming up the next week. This I feel is a good cadence to have within projects, but there might be some projects that you need to execute faster. So you might have more than one meeting, maybe about 2 meetings a week. Again, the thing to watch out over here is not to have meetings set up every day. That is a recipe for disaster, because everybody minimizes the importance of those meetings and tends not to be able to make it sometimes. So if they start missing one meeting, they just get into that habit of, calling off that meeting whenever it pleases them, and you don't get to maintain the pace of your project. And the last thing you want to cover in this section is how to handle scope changes. It is inevitable for you to face the situation where a client sees a certain version and imagines what the next version of that feature can be, and says that let's build that. It is just human nature. When you see version 1 of something, you know what version 2 is going to look like, and you want to make that happen. So this is a challenge that you're going to have to deal with. So again, set the expectations that all these scope changes will also be done only in these meetings, and you will not be accepting any scope changes in between. Another aspect that you want to dictate over here is your times during which you're going to be available to the client. Don't be in a position where you don't specify this and end up having to field calls at all hours of the day. This is something that I didn't want to do at all, so I always clearly communicated to the clients that we don't accept any discussions or calls post 6 o'clock in the evening. This was just to set the expectations right with the client right from get-go. So safeguard yourself by having all these things specified in the engagement guidelines ahead of time. Support. This is a section that should be covered within your proposal. So this is, even though you're a design team, it doesn't mean that you do not have to provide support. There are absolutely going to be things within the design that you're going to have to explain to some of the stakeholders from the client's team, and that is definitely something that is going to be handled through the mechanism of support. How much is actually included is something that you're going to discuss. Typically, the way we worked within our agency was that during the term of the project, support was included. And at the time of handover, they had 30 days to seek any kind of clarifications from us if they so wished. But post those 30 days, we would actually charge for any such support calls. And those rates were also included in the proposal ahead of time. This frequently becomes a necessity because there are some projects that might take 3 to 6 months to implement after your design work is done. And it's hard to pull out time from another project that you might be involved on at that particular point in time and then provide support for one of these older projects. And this is especially hard when you don't see any revenue coming in from these efforts. So it is imperative that you actually specify what your policies are regarding support. Another aspect to cover over here is how you're going to provide the support. Is it going to be electronic? Is it going to be on Zoom meetings? Is it going to be some other form? And if you were to require to travel to the client's location, how much would you charge? What would you be compensated for? So we would actually have this specification saying that anything local within our home city, we wouldn't charge for travel. But if we were required to travel outside of our home city, then all flights and all other transportation methods have to be compensated for by the client. So there was a situation where we were actually required to go and provide support on site because it was easier to gather all the client side stakeholders into one location and have us go and meet them there, rather than for us to engage with them on an electronic basis. So that's what we did. All our travel was compensated for, and the job got done rather easily. And they chose to do this simply because we had already specified what our mechanism for support was going to be. And finally, we are at the biggest and most important part of the proposal, which is the cost. Let's begin by talking about the various kinds of clients that you're going to work with. So there are going to be clients that are going to be extremely sensitive to price, and there are going to be clients that are not sensitive to price but want to be able to do what the maximum that they can achieve. So you never know what kind of a client you're dealing with always. You could be dealing with a large organization but with a department that has a very small budget, or the opposite, where you're dealing with a small company but the proprietor is willing to put in anything required in order to corner a market per se. So you cannot always judge from the outset as to what kind of a client you're dealing with. And it's also harder because this is not something that they will advertise, that they're okay with the cost being higher or anything like that. So for this reason, you're always shooting in the dark as to what kind of a client you're dealing with. So should you provide one proposal with one price, or do you provide a bouquet of packages? So I used to do one proposal with one price as a mechanism before, and then hope to sit and negotiate once the client gets back to you. But I realized that after a lot of engagements that people wouldn't come back and renegotiate prices and such. So they are seeking proposals from multiple vendors at the same time, and they would just make the choice as to who's the best one, and then they go forward. Nobody has the time to get back and renegotiate and things like that. So this was a do or die, one shot kind of a situation. So what I did was to actually come up with 3 different packages. One is package A was the bare minimums that we would require in order to execute this particular project. And package C was the everything included, whatever our company was capable of and what we thought was most appropriate for this particular project, we would include in option C. But the package B was the sensible one, where we were trying to be competitive with the industry. So this was the one that had all the bare minimums plus some of the things which would include things that would help the client actually set themselves apart through the project. But you've seen these kind of packages all the time in McDonald's, in Burger King, and so on, right? So you have the small, medium, large kind of packaging. This is done because humans don't like it when you provide them only one option, nor do they like it when you have too many options. So 3 seems to be the right number that most people are comfortable with. And typically when you provide them 3 options, the second option is the one that they all tend to pick most often. Okay. Anyway, for you to be able to come up with these packages, there's one aspect that you really need to be able to pay attention to. You remember that feature list? You remember that feature list we spoke about earlier? That is going to talk about all the various features that you're going to build. But here in this section, you're actually talking about those features based on deliverables. So wireframings for this feature, that's what you're kind of like having to do over here. But how do you do this math? How do you go between these things, right? So that took me a long time to actually develop. And I actually came up with a worksheet, that allowed me to do this. So that's because I was able to work that out. That is what enabled me to create these packages. In fact, because of the worksheet, I actually had the ability to add or remove any package and create a completely customized package for the client. And that has happened a couple of times. But most often, packages that you do provide are the ones that they pick from. And maybe they do one or an addition or a removal and such. And they would call back and say, how long are you going to take to go, revise this proposal and send it back to us? And for me, it was almost instant because I could just do that with the worksheet that I had. I could just turn on, turn off whichever feature they wanted, revise the proposal and send that right out. So that improved my workflow a lot because of this. I am going to be including some links to these things in the description. Another big aspect to cover over here is how you charge for additional work. So not everything is going to go based on the planning that you've done. Even if you called it a fixed bid proposal, it's rare that you will not exceed the requirements there. there'll be always going to be one additional feature or two additional things and things like that that you're going to have to accommodate. But the fact that you will mention that this is how you charge for additional work makes it very clear for you to have that discussion at that later point in time with the client and say, we had to charge extra and this is the number of hours we spent, and therefore this is the additional cost for this particular project. So that is something that you should also include as a clause within this section. Sometimes you're required to actually make some purchases in order to make the project work, right? So this includes things like, stock photos or stock footage in case of videos and such. And these are things that you purchase on behalf of the client. And sometimes these things have royalty. So that is something that you should also clearly call out within this section, that you will purchase the things for the client, but they'll have to bear the costs at the end of the day. So these are also aspects that you need to cover. You might also be talking about software that you need to purchase, like Figma licenses and such, that the client will require in order to be able to take the project over from you, take the handover from you. So that's another thing that you want to call out over here. Now we have to talk about the schedule of payments. So for the more financially inclined of you out there, you can understand that a payment, a full payment today is worth a lot more than the same equivalent or even a 10% extra payment that comes 6 months from now, right? So this is stuff that you really want to be very clear about. So you need to set the schedule of your payments also down and on paper and share that with your client. So typically the way we planned our schedules was to have one payment come ahead of the project, which is basically what initiates the project. The second payment comes midway through the project, and the third and last payment comes at the time of handover of the project to the client. So the proportions were 50% ahead of time, 25% in the middle, and final 25% in the end. So we got very few clients that would actually push back and say, I can't give you 50% ahead of time. And in very rare situations, we actually accepted that it would be okay, a four payment structure. But the reasoning is of the 3 payment schedule was something that we shared clearly with the client, saying that the majority of the thinking is going to happen in the beginning of the project, and therefore the major chunk coming ahead of time is also something that you require from the client. One more reason you're actually asking for a big chunk up ahead is so that the client is also committing to working with you. It shouldn't ever be a situation where you make one small mistake doing something in the project, and mistakes are possible. At that time, the client just bolts because they haven't paid you too much, or they've not paid you at all, and then it's in their mind that maybe we could have worked with somebody else and make that happen. However, if they've committed to you, they'll be committed to working with you through the mistake and making sure that the project actually works at the end of the day. So it's a good thing for you to request this payment, a large chunk ahead of time as well. The second payment was planned in such a way that at the end of the wireframing phase of the project, that's when we actually initiated the request for the second payment. The thing to keep in mind is how long it takes for people to pay you as well. So in India, a 30-day payment structure is a very common thing. You raise your invoice today and you expect to get paid 30 days later. But in Western countries like in the US and such, getting paid within 10 days from the date of invoice and things like that are commonplace as well. So that amount of time that you're going to not realize the payment in is also something that actually plays a role in the project as well. So regardless of their time schedules, it needs to kind of match your time schedules as well. So for us, it worked out really well because the first payment was actually issued without any delay because they need the project to actually start. But the second payment, when you initiate the invoice, we actually would take the remainder of the time. The 30 days was typically how much time we would take to complete the project. So we'd actually realize that payment for the second invoice by the end of the project. And that is when we would actually be able to raise the final invoice as well. And that had the condition of that payment clearing was required in order to do the handover. So there was another pressure on the client to actually complete your payment. So this was kind of like engineered in order to make this whole thing flow smoothly. And I'd ask you to kind of like keep that aspect in mind when you come up with your payment schedules as well. One thing that you should include within your proposals is to include protection measures. So we'd have clauses that would say that if any payments are delayed, we have the right to stop the project or terminate the project entirely. In case any payments are not made at all, then we had the right to withhold this project from the client in its entirety. So these are measures that we actually had in place. Depending on where you live and where you're doing business, you may or may not be able to pull this off, but figure out what the right measures are that would actually enable you to protect yourself in case your clients fail to pay you or pay you on time. So these are things that you should include over here. Do not be in a place where you think that this is not a good thing to put in place because you don't want to make a client feel bad and things like that. These were emotions that I went through in the beginning. It's easily understood by anybody in business that these are measures that you've taken to protect your business. Nobody is ever going to question you about these things, really. It's standard practice and people expect to see this all the time. Unless they initially got into this project and hoping to cheat you at some point, these aren't things that they would even refuse as a client. So don't hesitate putting these things in to protect yourself. All right, and the final component of the proposal is the annexures. There are actually 3 separate annexures that could be included if you want to, but I feel at least 2 of these are absolutely required. So the first annexure is about your company itself. This is where you're gonna get another chance to talk about who you are, what your company is about, and how you are different from others. So don't assume that all the people that are reading your proposal are actually knowledgeable of who you are or have seen the website and such. Of course, in larger companies, what happens is that the project is actually sanctioned by somebody, but the actual legwork is done by somebody lower down the pecking order. They'd go out and do the research in order to figure out which agencies to hire, reach out to all of them, tell them what the project is about, seek these proposals, and all these proposals are packaged and sent back to the higher-ups. So the higher-ups would probably not even know who these companies are that the other person or their colleague has actually reached out to. So they'd have to do the search again, find the website again, and then go to the website in order to figure out who you are. So just avoid that entire bit of work. So include that detail within this proposal, because the proposal is at least going to make it to their desk, and having that readily available to that higher up who's going to make the decision is going to make the job of hiring you a lot easier as well. The other important section that I feel you need to have is a list of your past clients. Now, don't include every client that you worked with. If possible, try to customize this section as well. The way you can do that is by including projects that are similar to the project that is being requested of you right here. So if somebody has come to you for an e-commerce website for fashion, include your other e-commerce projects over here, even if it is not in fashion. Or you might include fashion sites which are not e-commerce as well. So all of these things will actually help portray that you are actually capable of doing this kind of a project for this client. If you've done it for one of their competitors, then you're capable of doing it for them too, is what you're highlighting over here. And finally, if you feel like this is the optional annexure, if you feel like, include details about your team as well. If you are a small company, you might just be mentioning 3 or 4 people over there. But if you're a large company, you don't want to actually include the entire roster of all your employees. And that's not where you want to be there as well. Now, this is usually not a required section. If you want, this is a place where you can actually kind of differentiate who you are. This is not a section that I feel is an absolute necessity, but you can choose to include it if you want to, especially if you've got any key players who are such standouts that make the difference to the client, saying that, this is who we need to hire because these are the kind of people that are working there. So if you have that ability to kind of talk about it that way, include the details about your team in that case. All right. So that's basically it. Those are the components to include. But I have to take a minute to mention the things you should watch out for. The proposal doesn't play only a single role, and keep that in mind. A proposal is also used in a number of other ways. So one of the reasons people request proposals is because they've never worked with any other agency and they don't know how much they ought to pay for such a project. So prior to even beginning this project, the client might actually have to get a budget sanction for this particular project. So they might have to reach out to all these agencies and try to figure out, what if this was the project? How much would we how much would you generally charge? So, and because people don't simply just pass that along, they have to request for the proposals. So when you send out a proposal, that could be one of the purposes the client is trying to achieve through this. They are trying to benchmark what the project should be. The second possibility is they're just trying to create competition. Even if they want to work with your agency, they'll request proposals from others, just so that they know that you're not going to be the one gouging them or overcharging them in any way, right? So to just make sure of that, they might request proposals from a couple of other agencies as well. So you might be on the receiving end of that, where the client wants to work with a particular agency, but reaches out to you to also get an understanding whether that agency is charging them correctly or not. So that might be a purpose you're serving. The third reason can be playing is to meet somebody's bid quotas. So typically it happens in larger organizations. The project is kind of sanctioned by a certain person or a department head within the company. But the policies of the company stipulates that they have to seek competitive bids from 3, 5, or 10 different agencies in order to make a decision between them. So this is to avoid those kind of situations where the person actually gets the project sanctioned by the company, but farms it out to a friend of theirs who'll offer them kickbacks and things like that, right? So to avoid those kind of situations, they actually request 3, 5, or X number of proposals at once, so that the chances of farming it out to somebody known and all these kind of corrupt situations can be avoided. So you might just be one of the many people that are actually submitting just to meet somebody else's bid quota. And I typically try to avoid these kind of situations, especially in the bid quota situations, because I felt that we never really are given a fair shake in these kind of situations. This is especially true in case of government projects, where it is a requirement always to actually get X number of bids for every particular project that is to be executed by them. So I typically avoided these kind of situations. It can be very profitable, but I just felt that, sending out these proposals, creating these proposals itself takes quite a long time, and then sending it out, following up, and all of these things that follow on from the proposal is a hard task for me to do, especially in situations involving governments. And finally, I have to say there are corrupt reasons for requesting proposals as well, and that is for getting free work done. So the way this pans out is that some department head wants to kind of like do this particular project, right? But they may not exactly know how to do this particular project well. So they'll reach out to a bunch of agencies and say, this is the grand idea. Tell me how you would actually do this thing. Kind of like dangling the project in front of you, especially the smaller agencies. And their objective in doing so is actually to get you to create those feature lists, right? And tell them that you would include authentication, you include this projection, whatever, XYZ features, right? You'd actually list it all out. That's what they're looking for. They want to be able to find all these great features that each of these agencies have kind of like provided to them. Then they'll collect all that together and possibly send it out to the team that they actually want to work with, and ask them to create a proposal that includes all of those features. So this is just a means for doing research for free. Now, it's unethical, I get it. But is there a way to avoid this? Not really. And so how do you console yourself? How do I sleep at night knowing that somebody else is taking advantage of me like this? So for this, I actually rely on this one story I'm gonna tell you, is that I actually spoke to my boss once upon a time in Adobe. His name was Phil. He's the guy who designed Lightroom, Adobe Lightroom. And there was this one situation where this particular feature that he had come up with had been copied by a competitor. So I went up to him and I said, look at this thing. What can we do about it? I was kind of infuriated, saying that, these people are copying you blatantly. So I still remember what he said. He was like, first of all, there's a lot more ideas like this where that one came from. So I'm not, like worried about it. And secondly, they're copying something that I thought about 6 months ago, right? So by the time they've copied it and actually put it into action, that's 6 months has already gone by. So we are already ahead of the competition, and that's the nature of the beast. We're gonna have to stay ahead. So I really remember that, that one should never operate from a place of scarcity. Ideas are not a scarce product. So the reality is that if you don't provide these great ideas, you never stood a chance of getting hired by a customer. But if you do include it, they might steal it. So be it. That's the nature of the things. That's how the cookie crumbles. So do you put your best ideas out there? Sure. Because if one great idea can come from you, the client should know that a ton of other great ideas also can come from you, and that's the reason to hire you. So that's what you need to be doing over here. So don't worry about the downside so much in this particular situation, and go forward and do it anyway. That's what I'd say. Great. So with that out of the way, that's pretty much everything that I wanted to talk about. I must tell you one aspect about automation over here. A lot of this process, I've actually created tools like those templates which I mentioned earlier, the worksheets that I touched upon earlier as well, both of whose links I've included in the description here. So use them and save yourself a ton of time while developing another proposal. But I was very tempted during my time running the company to automate this entire process, to build a website where the clients could actually come in and specify what they want, and you hit a button and get a proposal generated for them. But I stopped short of that. I automated everything up to that very point, but I stopped short of that exactly. Because one of the other roles a proposal plays is to actually help you know who the client is. When you talk to them, when you engage with them, do the discovery sessions with them, you're actually understanding who this client is. And I never wanted to be a machine that would just execute every project that actually came in the door. I actually liked working on my projects, and I wanted to work on as many varied projects as I could possibly, because I just love learning new things. And being in UX actually allowed me to get into fields that I would never think about at any other point in time, right? So I've learned a lot during this time, and I always wanted to work with clients that actually that I would wake up and say that I look forward to working with these people. I never wanted to be in a place where where I'm feeling like why the hell do I have to wake up and go work with this guy. I have run into some terrible clients before, but that's part of the game. But I didn't want to be in a place where I do that on a frequent basis either. So this was also a very like a filtration process. So that's the reason I didn't go out and automate. Okay, so it's a conscious decision. It was never something that I didn't consider. It's just a conscious decision I took in order to not automate it all the way. But you might feel differently and you might want to automate, but it's totally your call. But I'm just telling you what I thought about this situation, right? All right, so I hope you found this video useful. The next one I'm going to be working on is actually on the other side, where I'm going to be talking about how to hire a UX agency, so that's it's client focused, but I really think it's actually going to be very useful to you as a UX designer or a UX agency. It'll be very useful for you to listen to as well. All right, so I look forward to seeing you then. Until then, hasta luego.